I grew our family business to $50 million. Then my sister called me worthless, but the next day shocked her. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never thought I'd end up here telling this story to strangers, my voice shaking, my hands still trembling. But I guess this is where it begins. Everything I built, everything I fought for, started in a small garage when I was barely out of college. We had nothing back then, just my sister, my parents, and me. A dream we all shared to grow something real, something lasting. I poured every ounce of my soul into it. Long days, endless nights, missed birthdays, forgotten dinners. But it didn't matter, because every late night, every sacrifice felt worth it when I saw that tiny idea transform into something bigger than myself, bigger than us. I grew our family business from nothing to $50 million. 50 million, the numbers still make my head spin. But what they don't tell you is what came after. That's where everything started to break apart. I remember the day like it was yesterday. I walked into the office early, coffee in hand, exhausted but smiling. There were emails to check, deals to finalize, but I felt a strange heaviness in the air. It wasn't just stress, it was something else. I didn't know what it was yet. My sister was already there, sitting in the corner office I'd helped build. She didn't look at me when I walked in. Instead, she stared at her laptop, her fingers tapping so fast I thought the keys might break. I thought maybe she was stressed too, but there was something sharper in her silence, a quiet that felt dangerous. That morning we had a meeting, our biggest deal of the year. I walked in with the usual energy, trying to keep the mood light, but she barely said a word. The conversation was strained. It was subtle at first, but there was tension in her tone, a slight coldness that felt unfamiliar. I brushed it off, thinking we all have off days. But deep down, something in me sensed it wasn't just stress. Something was brewing. I couldn't shake it. Later that day, after the meeting, she called me into her office. I was tired, but I walked in smiling, hoping maybe we could talk things out. But she didn't smile back. Her eyes were hard, almost empty. Then she said something I'll never forget. Words so sharp, so cruel, that I felt them sink deep into my chest. "You're worthless, Alec." Just like that. No explanation, no warning, not a hint before it dropped like a blade. Worthless. My throat closed. My coffee cup slipped from my hand. I stared at her, unable to believe she had just said that. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But instead, I just stood there, numb. My mind raced. Did I hear her right? My sister, my partner in this dream, the one I trusted more than anyone, had just destroyed years of hard work with 3 words. I felt like the floor had been pulled from beneath me. My body was still, but my heart was pounding louder than ever. Something inside me shifted in that moment. I wasn't just hurt. I was confused, angry, afraid, and most of all, curious. What had happened overnight to make her say something so devastating? The next day changed everything. I walked into the office, expecting awkwardness, but it was worse. The entire atmosphere felt different, cold, heavy. My team avoided eye contact. My sister, she acted as if nothing happened, like her words the day before had been nothing but a passing thought. But I couldn't shake them. Worthless. Over and over, I heard it echo in my mind. And then I found myself wondering, not just why she said it, but whether she had a reason. Was there something I didn't know? Something hidden that would explain it all? That afternoon, I went to the rooftop of our office building. The city sprawled beneath me, lights flickering like stars. I leaned against the railing, trying to breathe. My mind replayed every meeting, every conversation with her. Did I miss a warning? Was there something I overlooked? And then I realized, maybe this wasn't just about business. Maybe this was about something deeper, something personal, something she never told me. I didn't know it then, but that day was the start of a storm that would consume everything I had built. My family, my business, my life. I didn't just face betrayal, I was about to face the kind of truth that would change me forever. And the most terrifying part, I had no idea it was coming. But I was about to learn. The day after I stood on that rooftop, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying her words, worthless like a broken record. I couldn't stop. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. There was a coldness, a finality, like she was closing a door I didn't even know existed. I kept asking myself, why? I kept telling myself I'd find the answer. But the truth is, I wasn't ready for what I was about to uncover. That morning, I walked into the office with more questions than answers. My team noticed my silence. The usual greetings felt heavy. People sensed something was off, and so did she. My sister, she was in her corner office again, looking over documents, but her posture was different, tense, almost guarded. I felt her eyes on me as I passed by, but she looked away before I could meet her gaze. That felt worse than any confrontation. It was avoidance. I decided to push through it. I went straight to the files for the new project we had been working on. Numbers, graphs, projections, they were all there. Everything we had built was right in front of me. And yet, in that moment, it felt fragile, like it could shatter with one wrong word. I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to her voice, almost cold, saying that single word, worthless. I didn't know that she was already planning something that day, something that would tear apart everything we had built together. Around midday, she called me into a meeting. I walked in, expecting a routine discussion, but the air was heavy again. She slid a folder toward me without a word. My fingers hesitated before touching it. Inside were documents I didn't recognize, contracts, letters, and something else. An email chain. My sister had been talking to people outside of the company, behind my back. People who wanted to take control of everything we had worked for. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they'd hear it. I looked up at her, and she was watching me carefully, expression unreadable. My voice caught when I asked, "What is this?" She smiled faintly, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp. "It's just business, Alec," she said softly. "You've done your part. Now it's time for someone else to lead." Those words didn't just sting, they burned. $50 million. Years of my life poured into this, and in one sentence, she tried to erase all of it. But the worst part wasn't even that. The worst part was the certainty in her tone, the way she acted like I was the one who didn't belong. I left her office without another word, clutching the folder like it was a weapon. My steps were heavy, my mind racing. Every step I took felt like walking toward an unknown battlefield. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights glowing faintly through the windows. I stared at the folder on my desk, unable to open it. Part of me was terrified of what I might find inside, and part of me knew I had to. When I finally opened it, the truth hit me harder than her words ever could. There were deals in progress that I hadn't been told about. Deals that would hand our business, our legacy, to strangers. Two people who didn't care about what we had built. Two people who would strip it apart for their own gain. My hands shook as I read. Betrayal wasn't just in words anymore, it was in action. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over possibilities in my mind. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this? We had built something together, me, her, our family, and now it felt like she was erasing it all. I kept asking myself if I had missed the signs, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. She had been planning this for a long time, and whatever her reason, it wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. By the next morning, I was certain of one thing. I couldn't let this go quietly. Whatever she was planning, I had to stop it. Even if it meant risking everything. I didn't know what the cost would be, but I knew it would be high. And I knew, the moment I stepped back into that office, nothing would ever be the same again, because betrayal changes everything, and mine was just beginning. The next morning, I walked into the office with a strange mix of determination and dread. My chest felt heavy, like I was carrying something I couldn't set down. The air felt different the moment I stepped through the glass doors. My team greeted me, but their smiles felt forced, as though they could sense the storm brewing. I didn't want to speak to anyone, not yet. I headed straight for my desk and opened the folder again. The papers were spread out like pieces of a puzzle, each one telling a story I didn't want to hear. Emails between my sister and strangers I'd never met. Legal documents transferring ownership of parts of the company. Notes about meetings scheduled without me. Everything was there. It was undeniable. She wasn't just planning a takeover, she had already started it. My mind was spinning. I thought about confronting her, but something told me it wasn't safe to do it in the open. Not yet. So instead, I began quietly gathering my own evidence, making my own notes. Every email, every file proof. My hands trembled as I worked, not from fear of losing the company, but from the weight of realizing the truth. She was ready to destroy not just the business, but me. That afternoon, I stayed late. The office emptied, the hum of the city outside growing quieter. I could hear my own breathing. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I was crossing a line. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about trust, loyalty, family. I kept asking myself, how could someone I loved so deeply become my greatest enemy? When I finally closed my laptop, my mind was made up. I wasn't going to let her take everything. I didn't know how I was going to stop her, but I knew I had to try. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts circled endlessly around her words. Worthless. They burned into me again and again. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I was quiet, focused. I slipped into her office without knocking. She was already there, reviewing documents with her calm, cold expression. She looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but steady. She didn't answer. Instead, she just motioned for me to sit. The silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. My heart pounded in my chest. I had rehearsed what I was going to say for hours, but the moment came, my words faltered. "I know," I finally said. "I know what you've been doing." Her smile faded. She leaned back in her chair and studied me, as though deciding whether to confirm it or deny it. "Alec," she said softly, "you don't understand. This isn't personal." But I did understand. I understood more than she thought. This was personal. It was about power, about control, about proving something to herself at my expense. My stomach turned as the truth sank in. This wasn't about saving the company. This was about destroying me. The next hours passed in a blur. I stayed in her office longer than I should have, listening to her explanations, her excuses. Every word felt like a dagger wrapped in silk. She spoke of business strategy, of competition, of survival. But underneath it all was something darker, a quiet resentment I hadn't seen before. By the time I left her office, I knew the war had begun. I had crossed a line. There was no going back. I felt the weight of it pressing against me. But I also felt a strange clarity. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the folder, my laptop, and a stack of notes. I made a list of everything I needed: proof, witnesses, a plan. My hands shook, but my mind was sharp. I knew this fight wouldn't be easy. She had power, connections, money, but I had something else. I had truth, and sometimes truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. As the city outside slept, I whispered to myself, "You think you can break me, but you don't know who you're dealing with." The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight. The next morning I arrived at the office earlier than anyone else. The air was still cool, the city just waking up outside the glass windows. I carried my folder like a shield. Every step toward my sister's office felt heavier, like walking through thick water. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't know if I was ready to face her. When I stepped inside, she was already there. The same calm, cold look. She didn't look surprised to see me, as if she had been waiting for this moment. My voice felt small but firm when I spoke. "We need to settle this." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "Settle what?" she asked softly, almost too sweetly. That voice, once warm and comforting, was now sharp and deliberate. I could feel her watching me, like a predator studying prey. I placed the folder on her desk. "Everything I know about your deals, the contracts, the emails. You've been cutting me out of everything." My hands trembled, but I kept my voice steady. "Why, after everything we built?" Her lips pressed together, and for a moment, silence filled the room. Then she spoke, her voice low, deliberate. "Because you were weak. You were afraid to make the hard moves. You were too sentimental. This company needs strength, Alec, and you were holding it back." Her words hit me harder than any blow. Weak, sentimental, worthless. That word echoed in my mind again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear apart every paper on her desk, but instead, I stayed quiet. I let her speak. She stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the city like it belonged to her. "This isn't just about business anymore. It's about survival, and I'm the one who's prepared to fight for it." She turned to look at me, eyes cold and unyielding. "The question is, can you?" I felt my chest tighten. My whole body wanted to push back, but part of me knew this wasn't just a confrontation, it was a battlefield, and she had already chosen her weapons. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing there was no turning back. Later that day, I called a few trusted people, lawyers, old partners, anyone who could help me. I started building my own case, piece by piece. Every conversation, every phone call, added fuel to the fire inside me. I wasn't just fighting for the company anymore. I was fighting for myself. Days turned into nights. I worked around the clock, barely eating or sleeping. Every moment was consumed by the battle ahead. I found myself replaying our childhood, The two of us, in that tiny garage, dreaming of building something bigger. Now, it felt like all of that had been ripped away in a single moment. One evening, I stood alone in the office, looking out at the city skyline. The lights glittered, but I felt nothing. I wasn't sure if I was scared or driven. Maybe both. I thought about confronting her again. Maybe I would. Maybe I needed to. But I knew it had to be on my terms, not hers. That night, I stayed late. I pored over the evidence I had collected. Every contract, every email, every document was a piece of proof. But there was something else, something deeper. A pattern of betrayal that went beyond business. She wasn't just taking over the company. She was trying to erase me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, anger, sadness, fear. But beneath it all was a burning determination. I wasn't going to let her win, not without a fight. When I finally left the office, the city was quiet. My phone buzzed with messages, but I ignored them. I needed silence, clarity. I walked through the empty streets, clutching my folder close. Every step felt like walking toward a war I couldn't avoid, because this wasn't just a battle for a company anymore. This was a battle for my life, and I was ready to go all the way. The morning after, I walked into the office with a weight I could barely put into words. My stomach was tied in knots, my hands still trembling from the hours I'd spent preparing. Today, everything would change. I could feel it in my bones. Home when I stepped into her office. She didn't look surprised. She was already there, standing behind her desk, arms crossed, watching me with that same cold certainty I had come to dread. "You look ready," she said softly, but her tone was mocking. "I am," I replied, my voice low but steady. "I'm ready to end this." The folder in my hand was thick with proof of mail's contracts, hidden documents she thought I'd never find. I placed it on her desk. The papers slid toward her slowly, as if the moment itself was pulling them across. She didn't touch them at first. She just stared. "I know what you've been doing," I said. "I know about the deals, the betrayal. I know how you've been cutting me out. This isn't business anymore. It's personal." She laughed softly, a sound that made my chest tighten. "You think this is betrayal?" she asked. "You think I did this to hurt you?" "No, Alec. I did it to save us. You're too sentimental, too weak to make the hard calls. You were never going to protect this company the way I could." Her words cut deeper than I could explain. Weak, sentimental, worthless. They burned in my mind like embers. I wanted to shout, to cry, to throw the papers at her and walk out. But I stayed, because, in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about the company. It was about everything we had ever been. My sister and I were no longer on the same side, and there was no coming back from that. I took a deep breath. "You've made your choice, and now, so have I." I pulled out my phone and hit record. My voice shook at first, but I forced myself to speak. I told the world what she had done, the truth, raw, unfiltered, the betrayal, the lies, everything. By the time I stopped, the room felt different. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared, her eyes narrowing. The next days were chaos. Lawyers, reporters, whispers in every hallway. The company was torn apart, but I knew something important. I had exposed the truth, not just for me, but for everyone who had been silenced before. Weeks later, I stood outside the office building, looking up at the glass windows where so many battles had been fought. The air was crisp, carrying the sound of the city alive around me. I still felt pain, anger, betrayal, but also something stronger, relief, closure. I thought about my sister and the word she had said to me, the word that haunted me for weeks, worthless. I understood now that it wasn't the word that mattered, it was what I chose to do with it. I could let it break me, or I could let it build me. I chose to build, because the truth matters, and so does fighting for it, no matter the cost. And the real question now isn't whether I'll win or lose, it's whether you'll stand up for your truth when it matters most. What would you do if the people you trusted most turned against you? Would you walk away or fight? Because sometimes the greatest battle isn't fought with weapons, it's fought in the heart.